Shabbat Shalom, Mishpacha v'Chavarim.
Shabbat Shalom.
This Shabbat, we will be entering to a small series of a teaching on the person of Sha'ul of Tarsus.
Hallelujah.
Over time, I have noticed that many people have much difficulty to understand the message of Sha'ul that is found in the messianic portion of our Bible. Yet others, as they are sharing the good news to their friends, they have much difficulty to explain the theology or the purpose or even the goal of his teaching that Sha'ul is bringing in his letters, especially in regards to the Gentile believers. Have you noticed this?
Amen.
Question: why there is a problem and why there is a confusion when we read writings of Sha'ul? Or maybe things that was written about him. Perhaps the answer is that the Christian stream of theology wants to interpret him as it pleases them, not paying attention to everything that he wrote or that was written about him. Very common teaching among the Christian theologians is that Sha'ul was chosen by Adonai to correct the misunderstanding of the good news that was supposedly among the Nazarenes, the direct disciples of Yeshua. Very common teaching among the Christian theologians is in regards to Sha'ul, that he was called to take all of the Jewish and Gentile believers who believe in Yeshua, to take them from being under the law of God, and to bring them under the grace of God, which is given to the believers if they obey the guidance of the Ruach HaKodesh, the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Often, these Christian theologians teach that the first century Common Era was the time of transition from being under the law of God to being under the Ruach, under the Spirit. Have you heard that before?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Many times.
Did it trouble you, or maybe troubles them when you try to talk with them? They call that time a beginning of the new period of dispensation. But rather, maybe we should look at it as a period of messianic era, rather than a dispensation. On the other hand, the Jewish theologians, they point to Sha'ul that he was an apostate Jew who started Christianity as we know today, and that he led many Jews and Gentiles into apostasy. How we can reconcile this? Poor Sha'ul, wonder what he will say if he comes here. Maybe we'll invite him to come and to talk to us, no? Well, what is more dangerous in all of this is that the Christian theologians believe that all Yeshua disciples, his Talmudim disciples, did not understand Yeshua's message, nor they did understand the voice of the Ruach HaKodesh, which is the Holy Spirit. To this we may add it that Yeshua, in this case was not good enough to transmit a clear message, the purpose of the good news, to the Nazarenes, if we take their reasoning. That's why they did not understand. if we take that explanation. And that is why Yeshua had to stop Sha'ul on his way to Damascus, to appoint him to fix all of this misunderstanding among the Jewish believers and also to the Gentiles, and lay a foundation for Christianity as we know today, and to start developing what? That Christianity, to start developing after the destruction of the Second Temple, and started to flourishing in the second half century and the third century Common Era. Now, last all of these things is the element of truth that is always added to it, which is truth, that Sha'ul was chosen as Shaliach, which means apostle, or a Shaliach means a sent one. He was chosen as a Shaliach, as an apostle to Gentiles, and for that reason, his writing became the revelation of God's will to Gentiles, that they are to be people of faith under grace and free from the law of God. Free from the law of God. Therefore, in all of these disagreements, misinterpretations, and lack of understanding of the position and the teaching of Sha'ul of Tarsus, let us review what either he said in regards Gentiles, or what was written about him in about his saying to the Gentiles. In this series, we will not go to every quotation mark so-called difficult verses, but rather we will explore his position and his view of his role, of what was the role of his calling, teaching for the Gentiles, for the Gentile part of, in regards to the law of God, and in regards Judaism in large, in total. Are you with me? All right. Maybe this drash will be a little bit difficult, but without this foundation, we will not understand the rest of it. Perhaps a second series we can devote to the so-called difficult verses, although on some of them we will touch, but that will be not our purpose. At the beginning, let us establish the truth. Of course, the truth is supposed to set us free, right? The truth of the purpose of calling of Sha'ul to become the Shaliach. Can we say Shaliach?
Shaliach.
Apostle. Apostle of Yeshua. And let us clean up the misunderstanding and the mess that people adding into it. The first statement about this we read in Ma'aseh Hashlihim, which is, of course, Acts, chapter 9, where we, in short, have a description of a vision given from Yeshua to Ananias of Damascus, who was called by Yeshua to go to see the blinded Sha'ul, and there, by laying his hands on him, to restore his sight. In Ma'aseh Hashlihim, Acts chapter 9:15, we read, quote, "But Adonai said to him, Go, for he is chosen instrument of mine to bear my name before Gentiles and kings and the sons of Israel." End of quote. Here we have to notice that though Sha'ul is being called to go to the Goyim, to the Gentiles, or in other words we can say to the nations, but beside that he is also to minister to the Yehudim, to the Jewish people, to Israel. So it's not just one way. Question: do you think that his calling to minister to the Goyim, or the Gentiles, and the Jewish people, would contain two different messages to make them two different people, two different gospels. And some people want to portray that, others say no. There is one gospel, and that is to set them free from the law. Oh, sorry, to save them. I forgot. Now, in Romans chapter 11, we see in his letter Sha'ul identify himself in such a way as we read in chapter 11, verse 13, quote, "But I am speaking to you who are Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle of Gentile, I magnified my ministry." End of quote. Now, here we know that Sha'ul was to bring the good news, in Hebrew, Besorah, the good news to the Goyim, to the Gentiles, to the nations. Saying so, now we must come to the core message and understand what is the core message of the good news. And now how this message of the good news is to affect both Jews and Gentiles. How the salvation is to affect them all. Question: what is the core message of the Besorah, of the good news? Well, the answer is kind of very simple. Let us squeeze this answer to 2 verses. Why 2 verses? First and foremost, because it's not our object lesson to go deep to it, but these 2 verses, I suppose, will give you a clear picture, without any doubts. The first one is, of course, in the famous Yohanan chapter 3:16. John chapter 3:16, we read, quote, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life." End of quote. Second one is from Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. Quote, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourself, it is the gift of God." End of quote. Was that quick squeeze? I hope so. Therefore, we can summarize that salvation is given us in the name of Yeshua, and this salvation is not given for our works, our obedience, but it is by the grace of God through our faith in Yeshua. Are you agreeing with that? Wonderful. And then, what is the rest of that message that we can talk about? This is not all about the core message of the Besorah, of the good news. But the core message, first and foremost, is not giving a freedom for sinning and disobedience. As we read about this, surprisingly, in the same chapter of John, Yohanan chapter 3:36, quote, "He who believes in the Son has eternal life." True? True? "But he who does not obey the Son will not see life." True? What did he will see?
Wrath.
"The wrath of God abides on him." End of quote. This is the same chapter where we just read it, 3:16, right? So it is I would say it's a correction just in case if somebody misunderstands what is the salvation all about. Therefore, the first message that Sha'ul had to teach the Gentiles, the Gentile believers, is to come to faith in Yeshua. That's first and foremost. Then, the obedience to his teaching. Are you agreeing with that? So that the person will receive the promised salvation through faith in Yeshua, and not the wrath of God. Is that clear from that message so far? But that is not all. That is not all that brings, because this is just a foundation we laid about some truths. Now we're going to go to that mess, so-called mess. Why? Well, there's a problem with the Gentiles who also stood in the conflict of how Judaism had recognized salvation of the Gentiles. That was contrary to the salvation that was given in the name of Yeshua HaMashiach. And that was the core problem we see with Sha'ul teachings. Now, this problem was always starting where? First, among the Yehudim, among the Jewish people. Why? Why the problem was always there? Well, first and foremost, all of the covenants belongs to who? Gentiles?
Israel.
Israel. Everything. Mashiach belongs to Israel. Covenants, priesthood, temple, law, everything belongs to Israel. So, the issue was where? Within Israel, within the Yehudim. For it was a custom of Sha'ul first go where? To the synagogue. Wherever he would travel. He would go to the synagogues, and there he was teaching them about the Yehudim, based on the Tanakh, about what? About the Yeshua. That the Mashiach came, the HaMashiach came, and now on top of it, he was teaching them what? The new way of salvation, and that was contrary to what was believed among the Pharisees. But in regards salvation also of the Goyim. So there is two big problems that Sha'ul is facing once he goes to the synagogue. He is teaching them a new way of salvation for Yehudi, for Israel. And he is teaching also what? A new way of salvation for the Gentiles. And that is contrary, as it was understood among the Yehudim in general, the Pharisees. We read in numerous places that after a while Sha'ul's teachings in synagogues, what did they do with him? Throw him out. That's it. We don't want to hear you. In most cases in synagogues, because his teaching was contrary to what was believed worldwide in Judaism. That every Jew who is a righteous, who is practicing Judaism, has a place in the Olam Haba, in the world to come. That was the common understanding and teaching. Yes, they were waiting for HaMashiach, but most of them expected the King HaMashiach, as it was taught by the sages, not the Savior Mashiach, that will, with his coming, will guarantee them place in the world to come. That they did not expect. No one was teaching them that. And if there was a sages that were teaching, they were shut down. They were not popular and forgotten often at that time. Today, we see the same theology among the Yehudim, who do not want to accept the merit of sacrifice of Yeshua as an atoning sacrifice for sin. But they do accept the merit of almost sacrifice Yitzchak. They do accept that merit. It's interesting, huh? Next week we're going to read about the sacrifice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the Mishnah, we see a statement of such a belief, promising for Yehudim who are righteous the place in Olam Haba, in the world to come. In Tractate of Sanhedrin, chapter 10, verse 1, quote, "All Israel have a portion in the world to come. For it is written, your people are all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever. The branch of my planting, the work of my hands, that I may be glorified." End of quote. This is a popular statement, a doctrinal statement in Judaism worldwide until today. Mishnah was written in 200 Common Era, was composed in the 2nd century and completed in year 200 Common Era. question, what did the sages meant by saying so to the Yehudim? What do they mean by saying so? History of Israel was full of rebellion, of sinful behavior. How they could say this? Did they mean that no matter what they do, they have a place in Olam Haba, in the world to come? No, not so. But rather that the righteous that the righteousness is attributed to all who are members of the covenant. Therefore, such a righteousness imputed to all pious deeds, not of the individuals, but to the pious deeds of the forefathers, and then of their offsprings, and based on that, giving them grace and mercy when they sin. Do you understand that? All right. One more time. I'm going to try to say this in different words. They did not believe that all the people are righteous because of their deeds. Okay? They believed that their righteousness was imputed to them, or we can say it was attributed to all of them based on the forefathers. So believing that Avinu, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov were faithful and deserved the covenant, the promises of salvation, and that was imputed to them throughout the history. Okay? So yeah, some people teach, I heard some people say, if you believe in Jesus, or you can even sin, you're safe. Have you heard that before? It's a very similar concept. The early Christianity borrowed this concept from Judaism and wanted to bring people, even like Constantine brought an army through the river and said, today they were baptized and they're saved. Doesn't matter what they believe, what they know. So this is a concept that was borrowed and is flourishing in Christianity today as well. Therefore, the promise of the place in the Olam Haba was a merit given to Avinu Abraham according to Judaism, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and their salvation was a God's grace. It was a God's grace salvation, not something to be earned by their deeds or their own personal merit. That's why we have the problem in the first century Common Era. The Pharisees believe in the resurrection at the end time, and by it receiving what? The place in the Olam Haba. Today Judaism believes the same thing. Nothing has changed. They believe that all Yehudim who are in covenant, of course, which means circumcised, right? That they have a place in the world to come. Or we say in Hebrew, Olam Haba. Such a belief was also evident in the Qumran community way before Yeshua came to picture. Therefore, the most popular belief was that if the person was born an Israelite, or if a Gentile underwent a ritual circumcision and became proselyte, such a person automatically had a place in the Olam Haba, in the world to come. Why am I speaking so much about this? Because without this foundation, we will misunderstand what Sha'ul is teaching. So I want you to remember this. I try to underline all these things for next Shabbat. As we will go further and deeper, and you will see the light, and it will be very clear what he is teaching about. Now, that the event happened on the road to Damascus had an extreme ramification on Sha'ul understanding. It hit his core of his brain what he discovered. He was paralyzed in his brain, if I don't know how to express this deeper. The issue was not only in regards how a person will find a place on Olam Haba, but also how the Gentile will find their place in the Olam Haba. Huge, massive stroke in his understanding. With the revelation of Yeshua HaMashiach and his message, the foundation of the teaching of the sages of his time were crushed to pieces. That's why Sha'ul, after receiving the core message of salvation in the name of Yeshua and a new way for a grafting in the Gentiles, he decided to reconcile this news with Tanakh, with the Old Covenant writings, and to see if this message was actually found there in the Torah and in the prophets. Until this time, and it is today the same, believe me, the Jewish people, the Yehudim, they trust what the sages are teaching, not what is written in the Tanakh. They believe so solemnly that what the sages are teaching is exactly lining up with the Tanakh. Guess what? In Christianity is the same. What they hear from the pulpit, they believe, they trust it is the truth that is written in the Bible, especially the messianic portion of the writing of Sha'ul. We will yet discover how wrong they are. Now, watch this, what he said in Galatians chapter 1, 15 to 17, how this is confirming all of this. Quote, "But when God, who had set me apart even from my mother's womb, and called me," what? "Through his grace, was pleased." End of quote. See, I underline the colors so that you pay attention to those details. Now here Sha'ul points on the grace of God at the time when he was yet in his mother's womb. So that already shows you that the grace of God theology was well established in Judaism. And then he continues in the next pasuk that God was pleased, quote, "to reveal his Son in me so that I may preach him among Gentiles. I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood." End of quote. Sha'ul at this point says that he did not want to reconcile the new revelation with anybody, but on his own, with Elohim and with his scriptures. What a wisdom. Why? Because all of that he used to believe was, at one point, he was ready to persecute those who were different. Now that which he used to believe was crushed. And it was done in a super unnatural way by a personal revelation of Yeshua to him on the road to Damascus. Therefore, Sha'ul continues in Galatians 1:17, and he says, quote, "Nor did I go up to Yerushalayim to those who were Shalachim, apostles before me, but I went away to Arabia and returned once more to Damascus." End of quote. Some teachers believe that Sha'ul went to Qumran community to be separated from both, from the Pharisees and the Nazarenes, and do his own scriptural research with prayer and trembling. without any influence of those two strong religious parties that were against, in a way, of one another in their theological understanding. Now, but what we know, we don't know for sure it was Qumran. It's just suspicious. Why? Because Qumran community, in their teaching about the coming HaMashiach, they were very close, very similar to actually what was Revelation of Yeshua about. If you ever study the Qumran scrolls, you will know that they had a really good sense of what is Mashiach's coming all about, and that he is divine person also. I don't want to go there because this is not our object of lesson, okay? But now we know it is that he says in the next pasuk, in chapter 1, Galatians chapter 1, 18, he says, "Then 3 years later I went up to Jerusalem to become acquainted with Cephas, and stayed with him 15 days. End of quote. What we see here is now Sha'ul was ready to not only understand Yeshua, but by it be united with the Nazarenes, which he wanted to make sure they are right. The Jewish people of the Chaderech, can we say Chaderech?
Chaderech.
The way, the Jewish people of the way. He now was ready to unite with the Jewish people of the way. But now he was also ready to prove Yeshua's message from Tanakh and preach this to who? To Yehudim. Preach in their synagogues. And then to the Gentiles, proving them that this is the true message. To understand Sha'ul and what is he transmitting in his letters, it deeply depends on these differences of theologies of the sages that existed at that time or before that time, and the theology of Yeshua. That's where the problem is. The core problem was there, right there. That now he was able to preach from Tanakh, from the Old Covenant writings, and even to die for it. You know what? When you die for your faith, you have to have a really solid, firm foundation. He was ready to die. No, he was ready to kill for his theology. He was going after the Nazarenes, even to Damascus, to destroy them, right? So he is a warrior. He's Benjamite. Benjamin, people of Benjamin, of the tribe of Benjamin, are warriors. And he is a spiritual warrior. Now, on the other side of the coin. Why do you think was the bigger obstacle the teaching of the Nazarenes? That Sha'ul was ready now, at the time before, he was destroying them, but now is on their side. Perhaps the answer is in the proclamation of the new way of salvation in regards the way sages were teaching, that was announced at the Shavuot. And that is the beginning where the problem started between the Pharisees and the Nazarenes, Shavuot. And the declaration at Shavuot, written in Ma'aseh Hashlehim, in Acts chapter 4:12, it says, quote, "And there is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven that has been given among men by which we must be saved." End of quote. And that message is not to Gentiles. At that Shavuot, if were there any Gentile, they were proselytes. So they were already in the covenant. So they were mostly Yehudim from all over the world coming for Shavuot as it is commandment to be in the temple. or the man is commanded. So the pious, zealous Yehudi from all over the world come to Yerushalayim. And they hear what? Are you saying that what we used to believe is not right? Are you saying, Father, there is a new way that we must be saved? What are you talking, man? That was not put under the carpet. That affected and shook all the Pharisees who were teaching that they are the supreme teachers in Israel. Now, or maybe very comparable, a crushing between the Christian theology of the Torahless gospel and Nazarenes' theology of the Torah-conform gospel. Have you seen that? Men, they were amazed and began to recognize them as having been with Yeshua. End of quote. The key then for choosing Sha'ul for this mission was not that the Nazarene did not understand the message of Yeshua, or that Yeshua failed to properly transmit his message to them, and now only the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, could accomplish that? No, that is not true. The calling for Sha'ul is a different purpose, but rather that Yeshua had chosen Sha'ul as the one who was highly educated, not in the middle range, mediocre, no, highly educated, who would be able to prove Yeshua in his messages of salvation and grafting the Gentiles to one body with Yehudi, based not of what he had heard from the Nazarenes, or maybe the Ruach HaKodesh was conferring him this is the truth. No. Or maybe to say, I believe this is how we graft the Gentiles because that's what they say. No. 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 About Sha'ul resume or CV, we read in Ma'aseh HaShlihim, Acts chapter 22, 1 quote, "Brethren and fathers, hear my defense, which I now offer to you." And when they heard that he was addressing them in Hebrew dialect, they became even more quiet, and he said, end of quote. What was the Hebrew dialect that he spoke to them? Was the Hebrew dialect of Aramaic. We have to understand, Aramaic is the world commerce language of that time to the Middle East. Greek was the second, but Aramaic was in the Middle East the dominant language. So now the Jewish people have developed their own variation of the Aramaic, and this is proven. You know, you want to search, go ahead. You'll find out that the Yehudim spoke a little bit different dialect of Aramaic than the rest of those other countries. So let's go further. "I am a Jew born of Tarsus of Sicilia, but brought up in this city, educated under Gamaliel, strictly according to the law of our fathers, being zealous for God, just as you all are today." End of quote. A few things that are very important for us to remember as we go to the next message. Number one, Sha'ul grew up in Jerusalem. He was born in Tarsus, but he says he grew up in Jerusalem. Number two, he was educated under the biggest, the brightest religious authority of his time, the grandson of Hillel. Third, his education was strictly according to the halacha of the sages of the Pharisees. He says the law of our... Now I hope we have the proper foundation of understanding why Sha'ul in his letter is writing things that sometimes can be confusing. To many theologians, these things are hidden. They do not understand the battle